Tasha Williams was just another face in the bustling city of Willowbrook, a hard-working single mother who spent her days juggling 2 jobs to support her teenage daughter, Aaliyah. But on a seemingly ordinary Friday afternoon, her life took a turn she never could have anticipated. Tasha had stopped by a local grocery store after her shift at the diner. She filled her cart with the usual essentials: bread, milk, eggs. And as she made her way to the checkout, she noticed the sharp gazes of the security guard following her every move. This wasn't the first time Tasha had been scrutinized for no apparent reason, but she was used to the looks by now. She ignored it, her mind focused on getting home to her daughter. As she stepped out of the store, a police car pulled up, lights flashing, and officers rushed toward her. "Ma'am, we need you to stop right there," one of the officers commanded, his voice authoritative. Tasha froze, confused. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We received a call about a suspect matching your description who was involved in a shoplifting incident," the officer replied, his hand inching toward his belt. Tasha's heart raced. "I didn't steal anything. You can check my bags, my receipt. I paid for everything." But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The officers, without further question, began to cuff her. A crowd gathered, and Tasha felt the sting of humiliation rise in her throat. Her mind swirled with thoughts of Aaliyah waiting for her at home, unaware of what was happening. "I'm telling you, I didn't do anything wrong," Tasha pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. Suddenly, a voice from the crowd broke through the tension. "Wait, she didn't do anything." Heads turned toward the speaker, a middle-aged white woman who had been standing near Tasha inside the store. "I saw everything," the woman continued, stepping forward. "She paid for her groceries like everyone else. This is a mistake." More voices followed. Another man chimed in. "Yeah, I saw her too. There was no shoplifting. Why are you arresting her?" The officers hesitated, their grip on Tasha's arms loosening as more witnesses spoke up. Tasha's chest heaved with anxiety, her body trembling from the ordeal. She looked around, seeing faces she didn't know, people who could have easily walked away, but chose to stand up for her instead. One of the officers turned to his partner, clearly unsure of what to do next. The crowd grew louder, their demands for justice ringing through the air. "This is racial profiling," someone shouted. "You wouldn't have stopped her if she wasn't black." The officers, now visibly uncomfortable, uncuffed Tasha. "We apologize for the misunderstanding, ma'am," one of them mumbled. But Tasha wasn't interested in their apologies. She stared at them, her face a mixture of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a symptom of something much deeper, something that had followed her throughout her life and had now surfaced in the most public of ways. As the officers retreated to their car, the crowd slowly began to disperse. The middle-aged woman who had first spoken up approached Tasha, her face soft with concern. "I'm so sorry that happened to you," she said quietly. "I couldn't just stand by and let it happen." Tasha nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to do that, but you did, and it means more than you know." The woman smiled gently, placing a hand on Tasha's shoulder. "We have to look out for each other. It's the only way things will ever change." Tasha walked home that evening, her steps heavy, but her spirit slightly lighter. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she'd face prejudice, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Not because the system would magically fix itself, but because of the people who chose to stand up when it mattered. As she unlocked the door to her apartment and was greeted by Aaliyah's smiling face, Tasha hugged her daughter tightly. She knew the road ahead was still long and full of challenges, but today strangers had reminded her that she wasn't alone, and for that she was grateful. But the story wasn't over. This incident left a mark on Tasha. A few days later, she filed a formal complaint against the police department. What had happened to her was not just a one-time event. It was a reflection of a system that had repeatedly failed people like her. The department launched an internal investigation, but as weeks passed, it became clear that they intended to sweep the matter under the rug. That's when the witnesses came forward again. Several of them had recorded the incident on their phones, and they were determined to make sure Tasha's voice was heard. The videos went viral, and soon the local news picked up the story. What started as a humiliating moment for Tasha became a rallying cry for justice. Protests erupted in Willowbrook, demanding police accountability and an end to racial profiling. Signs reading "Justice for Tasha" flooded the streets. Tasha, who had never considered herself an activist, found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't asked for but was now leading. As the city's police chief publicly apologized and promised reform, Tasha stood on the steps of City Hall, looking out at the sea of people who had gathered to support her. She had once been just another face in the crowd, but now she was a symbol of resistance against an unjust system. And though the road to true equality was far from over, Tasha knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of the fight for change. As the protests continued, Tasha found herself in unfamiliar territory. She had always been a private person, but now she was thrust into the spotlight, the face of a movement she hadn't expected to lead. The viral videos of her wrongful arrest spread far and wide, igniting conversations about racial profiling, police misconduct, and systemic racism. Willowbrook became the epicenter of a growing wave of activism, with people from all walks of life coming together to demand justice. One evening, as Tasha sat on her couch, exhausted from another day of interviews and meetings with civil rights lawyers, Aaliyah joined her. The teenage girl had been watching everything unfold with a mix of admiration and concern. "Mom," Aaliyah said softly, "do you ever wish none of this had happened? That things could just go back to normal?" Tasha looked at her daughter, her heart heavy. "Normal hasn't been fair to us, Aaliyah. Normal is me being followed in stores. Normal is worrying every time I see a police car. I don't want that kind of normal anymore." Aaliyah nodded, understanding her mother's words even if they carried a weight she couldn't fully comprehend. As the weeks went on, the pressure mounted on the police department. The chief, who had initially promised change, was facing increasing scrutiny. The videos, the protests, and the media attention made it impossible for the department to sweep Tasha's case under the rug. A special task force was created to investigate the officers involved in the incident, and soon charges of misconduct were brought against them. But Tasha knew that true justice went beyond punishing a few individuals. The system itself needed to change. With the help of local activists and legal experts, she began pushing for new policies: mandatory body cameras for officers, anti-bias training, and community oversight of the police force. It was an uphill battle, but the momentum was on their side. Months later, after what felt like a lifetime of fighting, Tasha stood in front of a packed courtroom as the judge read the verdict. The officers responsible for her wrongful arrest were found guilty of misconduct. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was a step in the right direction. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, waiting to hear from Tasha. As she stepped up to the microphone, she took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. "I didn't ask for this," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "But I knew I couldn't stay silent. What happened to me was wrong, and it's something that happens to people like me every single day. But today, we proved that when we stand together, we can make a difference. This is just the beginning. We're going to keep fighting until no one has to live in fear because of the color of their skin." The crowd erupted in applause, and Tasha looked out at the sea of faces, young, old, black, white, all united in their demand for justice. As she walked away from the podium, Aaliyah ran up to her, wrapping her arms around her mother. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she whispered. Tasha smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "We did this together," she said. "And we're not done yet." Though the road ahead was still long, Tasha knew she wasn't walking it alone. What had started as a moment of injustice had transformed into a movement for change, and Tasha was determined to see it through. For herself, for Aaliyah, and for every person who had ever been silenced by the weight of prejudice. And in that moment, under the bright afternoon sun, Tasha felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope.